Muy buenas tardes a todos ustedes. Hello, good evening to everyone. Ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure for me to stand before the esteemed members of this seminar and to present this session entitled Challenges when Regulating New Energy Technologies, Part Number 8. As a token of gratitude to Professor Lee Paddock and Catherine Banet, who have kindly graced us with the presence here today, some parts of my presentation will be in English. But before we go into detail, I would like to thank Professor Íñigo del Guayo, the Spanish Energy Club, and the Academic Advisory Group for the opportunity to be here today with you and for making this seminar such a great success. The session is in 3 parts, simply to remind the speakers that they have a maximum 15 minutes for the presentation. Now, having said all of this, I would like to welcome Profesor José Juan González Márquez, quien nos va a hablar de las nuevas oportunidades del almacenamiento de electricidad en el sector energético mexicano tras la reforma del año 2013. El profesor, el doctor, el catedrático de Derecho y Medio Ambiente de la Universidad de México, de Metropolitana, es doctor en Derecho y Medio Ambiente por la Universidad de Alicante, maestro de Derecho Económico, ha participado como distinciones académicas como miembro del Sistema Nacional de Investigadores, ha tenido muchísimos cargos en el sector público, como secretario particular del director, ha colaborado ante distintos organismos, ha trabajado como consultor y ha elaborado distintos proyectos legislativos y reglamentarios. Desde luego es un gran honor tenerte con nosotros. Así que te doy tu palabra. Muchas gracias.
Gracias. Como ya es costumbre en este panel, comenzaré con las disculpas. Disculpas porque yo hablaré en español, mi presentación está en inglés y ahí dice Almería, España y no Madrid, España. No sé qué puedo cambiar. En segundo lugar, seguiré con los agradecimientos. Gracias a Íñigo por la invitación para estar aquí en este seminario. Gracias también al Club de Energía por su hospitalidad de hacer posible este encuentro entre diversos profesores de muchos países del mundo, con profesores españoles y practicantes de Derecho de la Energía. Bien, hace un rato señalábamos que la reforma energética de México que ocurre en el año 2013 y la reforma sobre la transición energética son dos cosas diferentes. La primera, lo que llamamos la reforma energética, ¿se escucha bien o no? Lo que llamamos la reforma energética tuvo un solo propósito: abrir un sector de la economía mexicana que había estado tradicionalmente cerrado. México era uno de los pocos países en el mundo en donde el sector energético era monopolio estatal. Entonces la reforma de 2013 tuvo ese objetivo de abrir a la inversión privada varias partes, no todas, pero sí varias partes del sector energético. Por otra parte, la transición energética tiene el objetivo de fundamentalmente contribuir a la reducción de gases de efecto invernadero, aunque México no esté obligado a ello. Vale decir que México solo contribuye con el 1.5% de las emisiones totales de estos gases. Sin embargo, él ha asumido compromisos voluntarios en esta materia que lo llevan a este tema de la transición energética. Entonces, son dos cosas diferentes, pero en la práctica tienen que converger. ¿Por qué? Porque por una parte, pasar de un esquema en donde había solo un generador, que era el Estado, solo un transmisor, que era el Estado, solo un distribuidor, que era el Estado, y un único oferente, que era el Estado, a un esquema en donde ahora tenemos muchos generadores, no solamente grandes generadores, también muchos pequeños generadores distribuidos cerca de los puntos de carga, pero se mantiene un único transmisor y distribuidor, porque esta área sigue siendo monopolio del Estado, pero a su vez tenemos muchos ofertantes del servicio. Por un lado. Por otro lado, pasar un esquema en donde solo se generaba con base en el gas y el carbón a un esquema donde tendría que haber muchas fuentes renovables que son intermitentes, y mezclar todo eso con las fuentes tradicionales, solo se puede lograr si se regulan aspectos que aún no han sido regulados. Por ejemplo, el almacenamiento de energía. es indispensable introducir, incluso en los países, comentaba el profesor, el colega de Colombia, en los países que están transitando hacia los renovables fuertemente, es necesario introducir una regulación sobre un sector que no es tradicional, el sector del almacenamiento de la energía, para poder mezclar renovables con no renovables, para poder mezclar generación que viene de diversas fuentes, de diversos dueños a distintos precios. Y ahí aparece este tema que yo quiero tocar, el almacenamiento de la energía. Primero, ¿qué es el almacenamiento de energía? El almacenamiento de electricidad consiste en almacenar electricidad, aunque ya sé que me van a decir que en sí mismo la electricidad no se almacena voluntariamente, o almacenar energía para producir electricidad que luego se usará en otro momento cuando sea mucho más conveniente en términos de precios, ¿no? Como ya comenté, ese tema no lo voy a obviar de la transición energética. Hay muchos sistemas de almacenamiento. Incluso podríamos aventurarnos a decir, algunos son tradicionales, como el almacenamiento mecánico. Ya encontramos la clave de este asunto. Bueno, es parte de... Que no se aburran. No, está bien ahí. Es para que no se aburran, no sé. A ver, ahí está mejor, ¿no? Bueno, decía, algunos sistemas de almacenamiento, está muy fuerte el volumen, pero eso, si le bajan, se elimina el problema. Creo que ahí está mejor, ¿no? ¿Sí? Bueno, algunos sistemas son tradicionales, como el almacenamiento mecánico, que consiste en usar la electricidad para subirla a las colinas, la parte alta de las aguas, y luego soltarla para generar electricidad. Eso es muy tradicional, pero hay otros mucho más modernos, como las baterías. Hay muchos tipos de baterías. También ahí hay tradicionales y mucho más complejas y mucho más modernas, pero al final el tema es que la idea es que la electricidad solo se puede almacenar si se transforma en otra forma de energía. Y después se revierte el proceso para obtener la electricidad. Eso es básicamente el almacenamiento de energía. ¿Cuál es la experiencia de México? Escasa, muy escasa, y me imagino que esto ocurre mucho también en otros países de América Latina. Ahí tenemos 4 o 5 ejemplos de lo que ha ocurrido con México. Quizás el más viejo, que es incluso anterior a la reforma energética, es el que pueden ver en el norte del país, el proyecto de almacenamiento de energía en un pueblito llamado San Juanico, que no tenía electricidad. Como no tenía electricidad, se instaló un generador de diésel primero, y ese daba electricidad para 3-4 horas al día, no era suficiente. Después, con ayuda de un organismo de Estados Unidos y la Comisión Federal de Electricidad Mexicana, se instaló un sistema de generación de electricidad renovable. Se mezcló la electricidad y de esa manera se pudo dar electricidad las 24 horas a este pueblito. Y así hay otras ideas, pero algunas de estas son apenas planes, no están concretados. Otra cosa que ha ocurrido en México que es muy interesante es que se creó el Banco de la Electricidad en el año 2010. Es muy curioso. Es algo que podemos llamar almacenamiento virtual y que se explica bien en esta gráfica. Bueno, yo creo que se explica bien, no sé si se entienda, pero procederé a intentar explicarlo. La línea azul que ustedes ven es la capacidad, no, es la energía contratada entre un generador y el transmisor de electricidad, que en este caso es la Comisión Federal. Es el contrato, la obligación que tiene de generar. Pero hay ocasiones en que una planta tiene más capacidad y genera más, y ni modo que la regrese. La Comisión Federal dice, me la quedo y la mando a otro uso, y entonces te debo, pero no te pago. Cuando tú bajes por alguna razón la generación, entonces compensamos el surplus con el déficit. Eso se llama Banco de Electricidad. Eso funcionó 4 años y desapareció en virtud de la reforma energética. Ya no funciona más. Ahora, es importante mencionar que el almacenamiento de la energía se puede dar en cualquiera de las 4 etapas tradicionales del proceso de la industria eléctrica. Se puede dar en la generación, se puede dar en la transmisión, se puede dar en la distribución o se puede dar en el consumo. Es factible hacerlo de cualquiera de esas maneras. Vamos a ver
cómo la legislación mexicana intenta regular este aspecto que es nuevo. Primero tendría que decir, más o menos la estructura jurídica regulatoria del sector eléctrico en México es así. Tenemos la Constitución, que fue reformada en el año 2013, básicamente para decir, de estas 4 actividades clásicas, generación, transmisión, distribución y oferta, hay 2 que son estratégicas y que mantiene el Estado, la transmisión y la distribución. Vale decir que la red mexicana de electricidad cubre el 97% del territorio nacional. Prácticamente, diría, no hace falta hacer más red. Entonces, se mantiene como una red pública. En cambio, la generación y la distribución se abren a la inversión privada y se regulan por la libre competencia, básicamente, ¿no? Eso hizo la Constitución. Con base en la Constitución se han dictado la Ley de la Industria Eléctrica en el año 2014, que regula, lo mismo que acabamos de decir, qué permisos se requieren, qué autoridad los da, etcétera, etcétera. Y, por aparte, la Ley de la Transición Energética en 2015, o sea, un año después de la Ley de la Energía Eléctrica y 2 años después de la reforma constitucional, y no es una ley que formara parte de lo que llamamos el paquete de reformas legislativas que ordena la Constitución en la reforma que se haga, viene como algo que se agrega. Y la Ley de Cambio Climático, que es anterior a la reforma a la Constitución. Aparte tenemos reglamentos de estas leyes, planes y programas, y una serie muy compleja de regulaciones administrativas que la legislación faculta a los organismos reguladores a emitir, y dentro de estos tenemos una cosa que se llama las reglas del mercado, que a su vez se componen de 2 documentos. Por una parte, las bases del mercado eléctrico, que las emite la Comisión Reguladora de Energía, y por otra parte, las reglas operativas del mercado, que las emite el Centro Nacional de Control de Energía. Las 2 juntas componen lo que se llaman las reglas del mercado. Menciono esto para que podamos entender la siguiente parte. Ahora, el tema del almacenamiento de energía no fue objeto de la reforma constitucional directamente, pero sí de forma muy indirecta. En un artículo transitorio del decreto de reformas se menciona el tema del almacenamiento de energía como un tema que tiene que incorporarse a la planeación, concretamente a un documento que se llama la Estrategia de la Transición Energética de 2014 y que luego se enmienda, se reformula en 2016. Allí aparece el tema, como ven es muy reciente, del almacenamiento de energía. Y en la legislación, la Ley de la Industria Eléctrica no lo considera, al menos no directamente. Son las bases del mercado eléctrico, que hace rato comenté, que recuerdan que estaban aquí en este esquemita, son las bases del mercado eléctrico las que dicen que el almacenamiento de energía es una forma de generación, lo cual es evidente un error. ¿Por qué? Porque yo dije hace rato que el almacenamiento se puede dar en cualquiera de las 4 etapas tradicionales de la industria eléctrica. Las reglas del mercado, que decía es un documento administrativo, una regulación administrativa emitida por la Comisión Reguladora de Energía, dicen que todos los sistemas de almacenamiento deben registrarse como si fueran generadores. En contrapartida, la Ley de la Transición Energética dice que las redes inteligentes de transmisión y distribución deben incluir sistemas de almacenamiento. Por lo tanto, equipara al almacenamiento con la transmisión, pero queda fuera cualquiera de las otras 2 etapas. ¿Me explico? Entonces, ¿qué ocurre aquí? Que el almacenamiento de energía es un tema que tiene mucho que ver tanto con la reforma como con la transición, y sin embargo, parece que es un tema no regulado, o por lo menos muy poco regulado, y si me apuran mucho, muy mal regulado, ¿no? ¿Por qué? Porque el entramado de regulaciones energéticas mexicanas lo considera al mismo tiempo generación y al mismo tiempo transmisión, lo cual es grave, pero es más grave porque Si es generación, es una actividad abierta a la inversión privada. Si es transmisión, es una actividad reservada al Estado. Yo creo que eso hay que clarificarlo. Está muy mal por el momento, no es suficiente. Por otra parte, yo creo que si pensamos que el almacenamiento se puede dar en cualquiera de las 4 etapas del proceso, no hay por qué identificarlo con alguna de ellas. Sería mucho mejor regularlo como una actividad separada y sujeta a su propio sistema de permisos, licencias y autorizaciones. Sería realmente lo adecuado, ¿no? Entonces, allí vemos cómo nuestras buenas ideas, eso tiene que ver con lo que decía Barry, tenemos buenas ideas, contribuir a la reducción de gases de efecto invernadero y con ello al cambio climático, a evitar el cambio climático a través de la transición energética, abrir un sector que ya no podía estar cerrado, pero justamente en el punto de confluencia que es el almacenamiento, que permite la mezcla de energías provenientes de distintas fuentes, y no solamente eso, sino de distintos generadores, tenemos un vacío legal. No está regulado el almacenamiento de energía y es una pieza clave de esta reforma que es de mucho más envergadura que la simple reforma de la apertura del sector energético. Y con eso me quedo. Me encantaría que me hicieran muchas preguntas, pero que sean fáciles.
Muy buenas, muchísimas gracias por tu brillante exposición y por ajustarte a los tiempos. Now let's move on to the second speaker. I'm really delighted to welcome Professor Lee Paddock from George Washington University. He will tell us something about the distributed resource planning. And Professor Lee is a really well-known authority. He is Associate Dean for Environmental Law Studies and Professor Lecturer in Law. He has been working also as a consultant and researcher in different universities. He has been taking part in different commissions, board, national and international activities. A couple of hundred books a chapter, so I can stay the whole afternoon here and evening, even until tomorrow. So, as I said, it's really an honor to have you here around, and I'm going to give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll try to keep my time. So, first, muchas gracias to Club Español and to Professor Del Guayo for the opportunity to be here. I'm going to follow up a little bit on some of the discussion at the end of Professor Moreno's presentation, talking more at the customer end. So in the United States, for many years, the distributed generation, in other words, generation at the household and commercial level, was seen by utilities as a minor thing going on, but that's no longer the case. The generation and other resources at the end of the distribution system are becoming very important. But our planning processes in figuring out what do we need for future resources have not kept up with that. So my discussion is going to be a little bit about how we've done planning in the past, what the expansion of the distribution edge resources are, and the kinds of considerations that need to be in place for future planning if we're going to properly utilize the distribution edge resources and also assure that those resources don't create problems in the energy networks. So, as many of you may know, the U.S., like many places for years, had a vertically integrated electric utility system where we had big generators, typically owned by the same companies that ran the transmission lines and distributed the energy. In the 1990s, we began a restructuring or liberalization process, but that ended with the Enron bankruptcy and the controversy over manipulating the California energy markets. So only 17 states are liberalized or restructured in the United States, many of them on the eastern side of the country, and that leaves many states with a traditional investor-owned, vertically integrated system. So that's important for planning purposes. So for vertically integrated utilities, they've used something called integrated resource planning for more than 20 years, maybe going back as much as 30 years. It was also referred to as least cost planning. So the idea was that utilities had to look ahead 20 years or 30 years. They had to project growth in need or demand for electricity, and they wanted to do two things. You didn't want to build too few facilities so that there wasn't enough energy, but you also didn't want to build too many facilities, because if you did that, it would raise the cost to consumers. This was done basically with what is called econometric forecasting. So economists would look at energy demand and forecast how that would change the need for electrical supply. This was largely a process between government utility regulators and the utility. And to the rest of the world, it was hardly known at all. In the restructured markets, of course, it was the market that did the planning. So if you needed more supplies, then the idea was that the prices would reach a point where new entrants would come into the market. Then in the actually around the mid 2004-05 era, we started to see a rapid expansion of what we refer to as distributed resources. In other words, not the big centralized utility, but out in the edge of the distribution network. Why did this happen? There were several public policies in the United States that promoted this. The first of those is known as Renewable Portfolio Standards. So some 29 or 30 states said that we want a minimum percentage of all electricity generated in the state to come from renewable energy. Many of those are 10 to 15% range, some 20% range, and they usually would project ahead. So in 2010, they may say, by 2020, we want 20% of the energy to come from renewables. So that's a mandate to the electric utilities. In some states today, like California and Minnesota and Massachusetts and New York, they're looking at a 50% renewable portfolio standard, 50% renewable. So this really has driven a lot of renewable development, including development at the distribution edge. A second policy that was in place is something called net metering. This requires that if you're generating renewable energy, that the utility has to allow you to offset the energy you generate against your utility bill. And in some states, it allows the generator at the distribution edge to sell back excess energy at market price, at full market price. So some 35 or so states have net metering policies, again, that encourage small generators at the distribution edge. This is now very controversial in the U.S., especially as more distributed energy occurs. Utilities start saying, well, these generators at the distribution edge are not paying their share of cost of maintaining the basic network that we need to have, and it's really unfair that they're getting full price for the energy that they generate, full retail price. There have been a variety of other incentives. There is a federal production tax credit that is very important in the U.S. Whoops. And that, sorry, I'm trying to keep my time. The federal production tax credit has been very important for larger renewable facilities, but also for small facilities. There are tax credits, there are state tax rebates, there are often local government incentives, there are sometimes incentives from the utility themselves. And so what we end up is something much more like this. Instead of a one large facility, we have lots of generators in lots of places that are feeding into the system in kind of a bi-directional flow of energy. So what are these resources and how are they growing in the U.S.? So distributed solar. Residential is the obvious one. We've just passed 1 million households in the U.S. that have residential solar. Commercial and industrial, this is also an important sector. Big stores like Walmart, the big discount store, has made a commitment to be 100% renewable, and a lot of the way that they're doing it is putting solar on their stores because they have big roofs. So that's another source of distributed energy. There's a third method of solar, which we call community solar in the U.S. This is designed for cities where people can't put solar on their rooftop, or perhaps areas where the folks can't afford solar, and it allows sometimes a utility, sometimes another type of provider to build a solar facility and essentially sell shares to people who can't either put it on their rooftop or at a price that's affordable for lower income community members. So those are the solar piece. Distributed wind, there's over 75,000 small wind generating facilities in the U.S. We're seeing an expansion of what is called combined heat and power, often in just individual buildings where they might use fuel cells or other types of power to power buildings or industrial facilities. We're beginning to see an expansion in the use of methane digesters, both in farms but also on wastewater treatment facilities, and there are thousands of wastewater treatment facilities in the country. As Professor José Juan mentioned, battery storage is becoming increasingly important, and there's a new model for battery storage where companies lease battery storage to commercial industrial operations and then allow the commercial industrial operations to store energy when the price is low because there's excess energy and use it for their facility, but they can also, the company that's leasing it will aggregate that energy and allow it to be sold back to the utility as an aggregator to meet capacity needs in times where demand is high. We're also expected to be almost 3 million electric vehicles in 2023, I think. Those could be another source of energy that could be called on from the distribution edge. Microgrids are expanding in the U.S. The microgrids are small grids, often in cities, designed to provide emergency services like hospital, gas station, and police services in case the grid goes down, or to power universities. These became particularly important after Hurricane Sandy blacked out the east coast of the U.S. There were a few microgrids, including one at Princeton University and New York University, that operated, even though they had the problem there. And now the state of Connecticut, right next to New York, has funded several microgrids for the purpose of keeping emergency services on if another emergency like Hurricane Sandy occurs. And they're another source of distribution edge resource. In addition, we're on the demand response, which is the ability to control demand in peak periods, is beginning to be thought of as a way of balancing some of the intermittency with wind and solar. So aggregators will get commitments from companies and from individuals to say, we'll reduce demand in peak periods or when there's an intermittency problem from wind and solar, so that the system needs less energy to operate at peak periods, and that's a growing area. And finally, energy efficiency is reducing the demand and meaning that for most electric utilities, even though our production is going up, we're using less energy. In fact, energy growth in the U.S. has been almost flat for many years now, for several years. And part of that is a legal mandate. Several states, including Minnesota, has a 1.5% annual energy efficiency requirement for utilities. They have to produce energy efficiency reductions of 1.5% every year for several years in a row. So what does that mean? Well, I think it means that that old integrated resource planning model, which took into account building large power plants is no longer the planning model that can work in the United States, and I think that's going to be true in many other countries as we get more distribution edge resources. So a few states are starting to look at a new approach, which has been referred to as distributed resource planning. So you look at all of those potential resources to project what future needs will be, and perhaps on a shorter time period, maybe 5 years and 10 years instead of 20 or 30, because these resources are changing so quickly. So what does that involve? First of all, it needs to involve far more stakeholders. This is not an issue just for utilities and the government anymore. Other resource providers need to be involved. Citizens need to be involved. Part of that is a question of what costs are being imposed on the utilities and what costs are being imposed on other individuals. I'm almost done. Secondly, location is critically important. Where do those distributed resources get located? If they're located in the wrong place, they can cause more congestion, more cost to upgrade substations or transmission lines. If they're in the right place, they can lower all those costs. Maybe you don't need a new substation or a new transmission line. And so we perhaps need new forms of compensation to incentivize optimal location of some of the larger distributed resources. How does this impact demand response and energy efficiency? That has to be part of the planning process because those are important in assessing the demand. So just to conclude on pointing out 3 states that are really heavily engaged in this process. Minnesota, where I worked for many years, in the Midwestern part of the country has begun looking at this kind of distributed resource planning. California has done this. In fact, California is one of the few states that has required utilities to disclose the location of the issues of all of their grids so you can identify locations where there are congestion. Mostly the utilities keep that to themselves. And then New York has been very prominent in this area. So this is a newly developing area, but I think it will be very important in the future anywhere where there are a lot of distribution edge resources. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, thank you so much for your real presentation. Now, finally, it is my pleasure to present Catherine Banet, who will speak on the Techno-nationalism in a context of energy transition, regulating innovation in maritime renewable energy technologies. Catherine Banet is a professor in energy law, petroleum energy law as well in the University of Oslo, Norway. She has been practiced as a lawyer not only in Norway but also in France, Belgium, and including Brussels. She has been working at the European Commission. She holds the PhD from 2012, so it is a really an honor to have you here around. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much. Buenas tardes. En primer lugar, quiero agradecer al club de la Energía para su apoyo y también al profesor del Arroyo. Y en segundo lugar, voy a continuar en inglés. So, yes, I will start my presentation by putting techno-nationalism, which is what I'm scrutinizing in terms of legal innovation, in a historical and political context. On the background of economic downturn, of recovery measures that we have seen after 2008 financial and budgetary crisis, many countries have turned back to protectionist behaviors. And it has applied to different sectors, and it has also applied to the clean technologies in general, which are necessary for the energy transition. So this has resulted in the adoption of techno-nationalist policies and measures. And just if you want to have a look at some of the program of some of the candidates, for example, in France, the defeated candidate, the energy program, that was a pure example of techno-nationalist measures in the energy sector. So the main question is what is the legal response to those fears and to the need of building up a national industry? Well, it has been primarily techno-nationalist policies that I'm going to review, and in that particular context of energy transition, they have resulted in a series of national measures which are, during the last years, however, challenged by a recent techno-globalist initiative where we see that there is a need to cooperate if we want to really diffuse those technologies and reach the goals in terms of mitigation and adaptation. So what is techno-nationalism? Just rapidly, or so-called technological nationalism? Well, it refers to protective measures, protective behaviors of some nations towards technology innovation, development, and diffusion. And both are important. It's both the development of the technologies, but as well their diffusion. And that has resulted in a series of policies, but more concretely in legal measures, in rules. Like its opposite, techno-globalism, the core element in techno-nationalism is to recognize the crucial role of technology innovation in terms of economic growth, but as well in other areas such as employment, national wealth, social welfare, energy independency, but as well international influence in general. It gives you international influence. And it is moving the competition from a competition between companies, as we all know, international competition, national competition, to a competition between states, between nations. So therefore, here, international law, international trade law is often the legislation that will be the primarily applicable legislation to assess those, the legality of those measures. And is related, as said, to other concepts. At the opposite, you find techno-globalism that recognize that we need to share and cooperate to diffuse those technologies, or more regional approach that we can't take. For example, we take the example of the European Union that is in the package from December, stating clearly on the paper that they want to be the best in the world in terms of renewable energy. This is more techno-regionalist approach. Nationalism is definitely back. It's not new, and we can track it since the 15th century. We have a long tradition for that, and it has already been challenged in 1776 by Adam Smith, making clear that, well, it might be better in terms of efficiency to cooperate instead of competing, because the nations cannot develop the full chain by themselves necessarily, all value chain. And we see a revival of that concept in connection, as say, to the post-2008 financial and budgetary crisis. I think that all the big research programs have been adopted after that. Horizon 2020 in Europe is a direct consequence of the 2008 financial crisis. The European Union made clear that they needed to invest in research, development, and innovation to secure future growth in Europe. And energy transitions. Energy transition that will rely on a wide range of new technologies. We have had already some examples here. So it is a new context for energy transition, although it relies heavily on technology innovation. And it is combining both low carbon technologies and new means like digitalization. And we have a wide spectrum of technologies. We know wind, solar, small, large hydropower, marine renewable technologies, but as well new technology in terms of energy transition, storage, batteries, hydrogen, geoengineering technologies, carbon capture and storage, electric vehicles, efficiency and saving, energy saving products, smart grids, etc., etc. Even nuclear energy can be mentioned in that list. So the countries have been reacting differently. Some of them put their clean technology, the need for clean technology, in a pure climate policy strategy. From what I understand, maybe Colombia can be taken as an example where the need to import the technology in order to achieve mitigation. while other countries will pursue a purely industrial policy in the development of clean technology, seeing that as potential export markets, so not necessarily using them at domestic level. Asia will be a very good example. Several countries in Asia just want to develop the components that will be exported to the countries needing them. But in most of the other countries, we will see a combination of both. The new clean technologies will be needed for domestic use, but as well want to secure future growth, green growth, and so export and develop a full value chain. Can take France, the UK, and I guess Spain could be also a good example of that. Why I took offshore wind as a good example? Well, first, offshore wind is expected to represent a large part of the increase in renewable energy generation in the future. So as solar, that will be the two main technologies, dominant technologies. Offshore wind is also part in many countries of the so-called ocean or blue economy. So it is already integrated in many policies. And it represents as well a full value chain where we can have, as you see on that graph table, upstream, midstream, and downstream structure, value chain, where we can identify different components, different services. And it goes from research and development to towers, to blade, to the operation and maintenance, etc. So we have a wide and full chain. And it also covers both domestic market and export potential. Here I also have included an overview of some of the companies along that value chain. Sometimes we find the same companies, and the Spanish companies are well represented in terms of offshore wind technologies. So that gives already a sense of the market competition. In terms of national measures, we have experienced, as said, a revival of that techno-nationalism, and it has been reflected in the adoption of mainly four types of legal measures. The first one is local content requirements. The second one is export subsidies, public procurements, and the preference given to national suppliers, and finally, protection of intellectual property rights. I will just go through the two first ones to give you some concrete examples of those measures. Because most of them, it relates to international trade, it relates to international trade constraints, and the WTO regime will be the first manner to assess the legality of those measures. So taking first the example of the local content requirements, that's one of the most common measures in relation to the development of new technologies, including the low-carbon energy technologies. It has been adopted both by developed OECD countries and developing countries. So all countries have tried to follow that line. What are we talking about when we talk about local content requirements? That's internal regulatory measures that require a certain percentage of the goods to come from domestic manufacturers. Good example is under a support scheme. Would it be a feed-in tariff or auctioning system where the legislation required that a certain percentage of the goods will be provided domestically, so domestic manufacturers. And that is reflected as a selection criteria in the support schemes. And that will constitute clearly a restraint to market entry for foreign suppliers. So if we look at the WTO regime and the WTO discipline, this will be caught under several agreements. The first one, the general non-discriminatory clause provided by the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariff and Trade, but as well under the Agreement of Trade-Related Investment Measures, Article 2 of the TRIMS Agreement, and finally in terms of procurement, by not a multilateral but a plurilateral agreement of government procurement, the TPA agreement. And we have a series of cases already. I just put the most recent ones, but the most central ones as well. First one is a very well-known case concerning Canada and the feed-in tariff in Canada, which required a certain percentage of the goods to be produced by Canadian manufacturers. So it has been challenged under the dispute settlement mechanism under the WTO. There is another case related to the same scheme. India, certain measures relating to solar cells, that time, same approach, requiring a certain share of the market to be provided by Indian manufacturers, and a more recent one is in the US. Same approach. So that, the last case is the last one, is from September last year. The second example is export subsidies and dumping practices. Here we are facing unfair competition due to lower prices or financial support at the domestic level that will affect competition internationally. So we have at the beginning like products, and then because of the supporting measure adopted at the domestic level, those like products will not be in a situation of fair competition internationally. So those national measures will be considered as dumping measures. But the other states can react to that and can adopt trade defense instruments, primarily anti-dumping and countervailing duties, by increasing, for example, the tariffs at the import. This has been the case. Again, under the WTO regime, they have been assessed. We find the two agreements mainly catching that those kind of measures, the agreement on subsidies and countervailing measures, and the agreement of anti-dumping. Some examples: China, measures concerning wind power equipment. That's a case from 2010. United States, same thing, same approach, some tax rebates, some national grants that have had an effect on the export of national products. United States, another case, and the European Union as well has a case where China has complained. But we see that those protective measures have an effect both on the efficiency of the diffusion of the technologies, but at the cost for the diffusion of the technologies. And I just want to quote Harry Kissinger here when he said that nationalism has been on the rise at the precise time when the most serious issues we all face can only be resolved through the recognition of our interdependence. And this is very much what we see during the last years. This is a kind of wake-up call, recognition that we need to cooperate in order to develop, diffuse, and adopt those technologies necessary for the energy transition. And that has resulted in legal initiatives. The first one, which has not been a success, is a part of the Doha negotiation run under the WTO regime, where they wanted to really develop a regime around the green goods, which include clean technologies. But a more recent initiative is not a multilateral one, but a plurilateral one between a smaller group of WTO members, including OECD members that are developing the technologies, and this is a novelty, and they are currently negotiating and drafting the so-called environmental goods agreement, which is a short-listed goods, environmental goods, which include, as I put some examples, wind turbines, air quality monitors, solar panels, etc. So they will be subject to a preferential trade regime, equal between all the parties to the agreement. And finally, in the Paris Agreement, we find clearly a reinforcement of the already enshrined requirement in the UNFCCC of a technology development and transfer framework. We have a technology mechanism already established since 2010. The Paris Agreement is reinforcing it. And it does that in two ways. It requires all the parties to take it into consideration and to financially contribute to the diffusion of them, development and transfer. That will be assessed during the stock take. And the second one is in terms of during the elaboration of the nationally determined contributions for all nations, where the developing countries can ask for the support of those mechanisms to identify and analyze the technologies they need. So here we see clearly that there is a trend for more techno-globalism. With that, I thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your excellent presentation, Catherine, and it was a really great privilege for me to be with you. Thank you so much. I would like to congratulate once again to the organizers for making this seminar possible, and I'm completely sure that you would like to take this opportunity to answer any questions that the audience may have. So please, if there's any question.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Tenía un par de preguntas. La primera es para el profesor González. Estaba usted hablando de la regulación del almacenamiento en México. Le he querido entender que había una cierta regulación para el caso de la generación y para el transporte. ¿Se ha previsto en México regular el almacenamiento para el consumidor? ¿Hay algún tipo de normativa planteada? ¿Y cómo ven esta cuestión allí? And then to Professor Paddock, you mentioned a controversy on the share of costs arising from the net, from the use of the net. How are government addressing this controversy? I can make the question again. You mentioned a controversy arising from the share of the cost of the net.
Net metering,
Yes.
yes.
How are the government or the market addressing this controversy?
Bueno, es muy fácil la mía. Decía que no hay regulación sobre el almacenamiento de energía, ni siquiera completamente en transmisión o generación, y aún mucho menos en el consumo. Es algo que realmente hace falta, ¿no?
So much of the controversy on net metering arises from the fact that when there were few small generators on the network, utilities weren't worried about net metering. It was a minor annoyance. But as more and more facilities come online, and especially if the requirement is that the utilities buy back the energy at full retail price, utilities have become more vocal in opposing that. And it shows up in a variety of ways. Some states, the legislature has tried to rescind net metering, but there's a lot of public opposition to that, to the point where politicians are put at risk if they rescind net metering. Some states have changed the payment rate from a retail rate to a wholesale rate, so it's smaller. Some states have begun to adopt a solar connection charge, so that there is a charge monthly on the consumer's bill for what the utilities say is the cost of maintaining the basic network, so that the consumer doesn't get the use of the network back up free. So those are the ways that the response has occurred. And this is, I think, a continuing controversy as more and more distribution edge resources come online.
Thank you. I have two questions. The first one is for Professor González, so I'm going to address the question in Spanish. Profesor José Juan, de acuerdo a lo que usted mencionó, ¿cuál es su impresión sobre la implementación que en el mediano o largo plazo puede tener el almacenamiento energético, teniendo en cuenta las implicaciones en términos de costos y de desarrollo tecnológico? And the second question is for Professor Catherine. How do you see this techno-nationalism in the term of the protection of national government or national industry within the European Union? European Union countries, of course.
Bien, en cuanto a la pregunta de Milton, yo diría, es muy importante porque el almacenamiento de energía en las casas puede ayudar mucho a reducir la cuenta de electricidad. Tú puedes almacenar electricidad durante la noche, cuando es más barata, y usarla durante el día. ¿Sí soy yo? ¿Sí? Entonces, creo que sería muy importante. Y además ya hay tecnologías, ¿no? Tesla está ya vendiendo baterías que se pueden instalar en la casa, igual que instalamos una alarma, ¿no? Entonces, el futuro básicamente es eso, por lo tanto requiere una regulación.
Continuing the question about the European Union, that's why I mentioned the European Union as a very good example of techno-regionalism, because here we have a wide spectrum of legislation that forbid any kind of national preference. So local requirements are not allowed under EU law. You have stated rules, stated regulation in terms of national support to some technologies that are very much regulated. Detailed regulation on the internal market, any barriers to the internal market will be scrutinized, and public procurement rules as well, in principle, forbids any kind of national preference. So here we have a very strict regional approach, but clear ambitions in terms of export.
Thank you for the question. Professor Paddock wants to share with us his vision, his opinion. Thank you.
Yeah, just briefly, so in the United States, under our U.S. Constitution and the Commerce Clause, local content requirements would not be allowed in any state. So that just as a comparison. One other quick point about the issue of nationalism. An interesting area to watch is the development of synthetic biology, the technology in that area. There is a significant, what's called an open source movement related to synthetic biology, with the idea that some of this technology is so important to the future health of the world that it should be shared openly rather than through some of the patent regimes or otherwise. Now, it's a small movement within synthetic biology, but it has an analogy to the energy for all issue, the idea that so many people need additional energy, that we should be sharing technologies in order to accomplish the UN Sustainable Development Goal.
Let me ask some question to Juan José, nuestro colega mexicano. Yo quería preguntarle sobre la reforma, no sobre el almacenamiento, sino sobre la reforma del mercado eléctrico en México. ¿No va demasiado rápido?
¿No va demasiado rápido?
Rápido. El mercado eléctrico, los nuevos derechos de transmisión, las nuevas, las nuevas normas que están implementando a lo largo del mercado mayorista y están muy alejados en el mercado minorista, o sea, nada.
Sí. Aquí hay que decir una cosa que es muy peculiar. La reforma energética en México ocurre en 2013 cuando se reforma la Constitución formalmente. Antes ya había ocurrido sin reformar la Constitución. Es decir, la Constitución decía que la generación de electricidad para servicio público era monopolio del Estado mexicano. Pero desde 1996, Electricidad de Francia estableció la primera planta de generación de energía eléctrica privada en el norte del país, al amparo de una reforma a un reglamento. O sea, 3 niveles abajo de la Constitución, un reglamento que ya permitía la generación de electricidad con la única condición de que solo se podía vender al monopolio de distribución nacional, no se podía vender directamente. Entonces, ya años atrás había muchas experiencias con los contratos de transmisión que se llamaban contratos de transmisión legados, que eran aquellos que se firmaban entre los productores privados de electricidad y la Comisión Federal de Electricidad. Entonces, sí, va rápido por eso, porque ya había experiencia. Luego, ¿por qué el mercado eléctrico mayorista? Porque es el que realmente les importa tanto a los inversionistas como al gobierno, y es menos negocio el mercado eléctrico minorista. Quizás por eso se explique esa rapidez con la que van las cosas, ¿no? Pero ya había muchos avances antes. No sé si respondo a la pregunta.
I have one question for Professor Catherine. As you were talking about offshore technology, when you show us the companies that are developing that business, maybe we can talk there about not a techno-nationalism, but a techno-block nationalism, because some of the enterprises are suffering mergers and acquisitions, such as Gamesa, and also I'm thinking of multi-block, such as General Electric and Alstom. They come together and they are developing, these magnificent generators. So maybe sometimes the nationalism is a question of blocks between China and United States, Europe, India.
I can answer here. Here, actually, that's just the forces of the markets. There's nothing to do with the nationality of the company. That will be traditional competition, and that will be if there is any anti-competitive behavior cooked by other rules in terms of merger and acquisition, anti-competitive behaviors. So we are under another regulatory framework, I would say, because it's competition. And we know that in certain industries, certain going to leave, others going to be bought by other companies. But there is part of that technology development for sure. I agree.
There's another one here.
Well, thank you very much for all the speakers. And well, my question is for Profesor González. Cuando en términos generales, cuando los legisladores latinoamericanos, incluyendo desde México hasta Argentina, se sientan a la mesa, ¿qué modelo siguen? ¿Cuál es el punto de partida o qué legislación creen que es la más oportuna para utilizarla como modelo de regulación energética?
Yo no creo que hayan utilizado ningún modelo en específico. Creo que algunas cosas las han copiado de la directiva europea, ¿no?, sobre liberalización de la industria eléctrica, por ejemplo, particularmente. Otras han tomado del modelo noruego, un poco de todo, ¿no? Pero al final tienen su propia concepción. También recuerda que México asumió en 1994 muchos compromisos en el Acuerdo de Libre Comercio en materia energética, y mucho de eso, lo que se hizo ahora fue realmente implementarlo. Como decía hace rato, primero se pensó abrir el sector sin modificar la Constitución. Recuerdo muy bien que alguna vez el profesor Lucas, quizás no recuerde, pero él dijo que en México la Constitución era algo así como la bandera, ¿no? O sea, no se podía tocar. Es cierto, no se tocaba la Constitución, pero se fue abriendo el sector energético poco a poco a través de reformas que incluso pasaban imperceptibles. La gente no se daba cuenta, e incluso el gobierno mexicano fue muy hábil políticamente para pasar esta reforma. Siempre dijo, no se tocará la Constitución, no va a cambiar, es más, vamos a volver al modelo cardenista de 1936. Pues sí, y la Constitución dice ahora, en materia energética no habrá concesiones. Y luego dice muy discretamente, pero habrá contratos. ¿Me explico? Entonces sí, es como una especie de mezcla de cosas y de ideas propias de la gente que está en el poder. Quizás por eso se equivoquen. Y tiene mucho que ver con lo que decía el profesor. Yo siempre he dicho, la política energética se construye en 3 niveles. En el primer nivel está la consideración de los científicos, ¿no?, que nos dicen por qué hay que combatir el cambio climático, etcétera, y hacen propuestas de cómo hacerlo. Después pasa al nivel político. Y ahí los políticos dicen, sí se puede o no, no es el momento, hay elecciones el próximo año, mejor más adelante, o bien, sí de una vez vamos a hacerlo. Y de ahí pasa al nivel de los juristas, que dicen, bueno, para hacer eso hay que modificar la Constitución, y modificar la Constitución es muy complicado, no sé qué. No. Ese proceso no se sigue en México y creo que en ningún país. Comienzan por el tercer nivel. No se toma en cuenta que dicen los científicos, no se consensan las reformas, sino que hacen lo que quieren. Sorry.
Thank you very much, and the opportunity for having 3 questions today. My question regards to President Donald Trump's proposal for a tax reform. Several weeks ago, it happens, and if the bill becomes legislation, how is it going to affect both America's and Mexico's energy legal frame, and also how is it going to affect this cleavage of globalism and nationalism, taking into account his rhetoric during his campaign and also his rhetoric toward a climate change agreement? Thank you.
Who wants to be first?
Well, I'll start, and of course the answer is no one knows. We need to wait until tomorrow morning and see what the Twitter response is. But there's some indications. One indication was the budget vote for this, the remainder of this year. So the Congress just extended the budget for the federal agencies for the next 6 months. And many of the things that President Trump wanted in that budget extension were not there. No border wall money for new border walls, not much money for immigration, full funding for the Environmental Protection Agency, full funding for research, both at places like the National Institute of Health, but also at the Department of Energy. And I think that's an early indication that a lot of things that Donald Trump wants to do, the people of the country and many of the representatives of the country do not want to do, even with a Republican-controlled House and Senate. His popularity is around 43%, between 40 and 43, one of the lowest levels of any president that's in their first few months in office in the last half century. He's going to have a difficult time accomplishing many of the things that he wants to do, including changing of the North American Free Trade Agreement. The Trans-Pacific Partnership is not going forward, but my guess is that some form of at least bilateral trade with Asia will go forward. So a lot of things that those of us who work in the environment are worried about are going to be problems, more at the administrative level than the legislative level. But it's clear to me, at least, that many of the things he talks about, he will have a hard time actually accomplishing with Congress and with the people in the country.
Concretamente en el campo de la electricidad, que es lo que nos ocupa, México y Estados Unidos están completamente integrados hace mucho tiempo. Las redes están interconectadas. Hay un fuerte comercio de electricidad entre México y Estados Unidos, pero en el balance general, México exporta a Estados Unidos más electricidad de la que importa. Y esto tiene una explicación. Generar la electricidad en México es más barato que generarla en Estados Unidos. Entonces, una planta en Tamaulipas, en norte de México, en la frontera con Estados Unidos, genera la electricidad que se consume del otro lado, más barato que si la hicieran allá. Si Estados Unidos decide que no se exporte más electricidad o le impone una tasa muy alta para desincentivar, pues bad for them. Nosotros no tenemos ningún problema, pero eso sí, si Estados Unidos impone aranceles a las exportaciones de México, México hará lo mismo. ¿Y saben qué? En el balance general, México va a ganar. Trump no se ha dado cuenta que no sabe lo que dice. ¿Me explico? México importa muchos productos de Estados Unidos que podría importar de otras partes del mundo o producirlos en mismo. Entonces, al final, ya los twitters no nos preocupan. Hace 3 meses sí. Hoy en día sabemos que Trump dice muchas cosas, pero que no puede hacer nada. Entonces, no hay preocupación ya.
If I can answer from the international person very shortly, I don't know the details of the bill or draft bill, so I cannot really express myself on that. But we have seen that all the cases that the WTO have been dealing with, that's a state level, not at any federal law. So I think we will see some very interesting initiatives at the state level. Would it be a part of the resist movement or not? But we have to follow up maybe some more aggressive measures that we have seen from before. In terms of multilateral approach with the US withdrawal from the Paris Agreement, we don't know yet. It's still discussed. But it appears as if it's better to be on the at the negotiation table if you want to have a say than leaving the agreement. So I think they will think twice before leaving. Would it be the WTO or the Paris Agreement?
Yeah, I might add, just specifically on climate change, the momentum to reduce greenhouse gases in the U.S., led by companies and states and local governments, is inexorable. It's going there, including all of these renewable energies. So I think the United States will continue to trend down on greenhouse gas emissions no matter what the president decides to do in that regard.
Right. Thank you so much for the interesting debate. Many thanks for coming, and see you tomorrow at 9:30.